back, everyone, to the late night review. And tonight I want to talk about, I think, what's a hidden gem. I think it's a hidden gem. I never hear it talked about in on movie reviews unless I might have missed a couple, but I never hear it mentioned much when people are doing their rankings of horror movies, horror classics, movies that they have nostalgia for or fun. I never hear it. Never hear it mentioned much. And if you do, I think it's rare. And I'm talking about Maniac Cop. Now, Maniac Cop, I think, is a horror classic, not because it's the scariest. It has some scary scenes in there compared to other movies. I've never gotten scared by horror movies. There's only a one horror movie. Well, there's a couple horror movies that ever scared me. And even when I was a kid, I wasn't scared by horror movies. I was scared by the only one I think was The Omen with Gregory Peck, and 2 and 3. Omen, the original 1, 2, and 3 scared me. Those were the only movies that I didn't get scared from. Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. I didn't even get scared of The Exorcist, except maybe for a couple scenes when I was a kid. I was born in 77, so I saw reruns of that. And but I did have a reoccurring dream of where Jason Voorhees was chasing me up the stairs, and I was trying to break out of a window or get out the window before he got me. I think that came from Friday the 13th, 3 and 4, when he was chasing certain victims upstairs and they were trying to get out the window. I think that's where that reoccurring dream came from. So that was kind of scary when I was a kid. Maniac Cop never really scared me. But it is a scary movie when you went into the horror, when you went into the video. That didn't sound right. When you went into the horror, when you went into the video store, when you went into the video house. No, but when you went into the video store, whenever you did, it was always in the horror section. Maniac Cop, even though I never really considered it scary. It had some scary scenes in there, but I always liked it. And Bruce Campbell is one of his earlier roles, one of his first movies. I've always loved Bruce Campbell. What a character. And Tom Atkins is in here. And William Smith is in here. Not Will Smith, but William Smith. He was Conan's father. He played Conan's father in the original Conan. He was in Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze, and he was with Clint Eastwood in any which way you can, not every which way but loose, but the second one, any which way you can. Fascinating guy. If you ever look him up, he's really interesting. Former bodybuilder. He worked for some intelligence agency, and I think he could speak like 3 or 4 or 5 Slavic languages. But anyway, it was a really good movie to me, Maniac Cop. Tom Atkins, always loved him. He was in Halloween 3, one of my favorites. He plays the detective in here trying to solve these murders, and they don't know who's committing the murders, obviously, until later. He suspects it's probably a police officer who's doing it. He kind of begins to suspect that. But to me, this movie is really interesting. I like Maniac Cop, and it's got good kills in here when you compare it to other horror movies. It's got an interesting plot. It's not any more fake than some of the Friday the 13th or Halloweens, which I really like. I've always liked those. It's got some scenes that don't make sense, just like those and some other horror movies, but I think it deserves to be talked about. It might not be up there with the best Halloween movies or the best Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Streets or Chainsaws or any of those, but I think part 1 of Maniac Cop and part 2 are fun. I think they're interesting, and I think they deserve to not only be talked about and reviewed, but I do put them up there with some of the other horror movies that I've liked a lot. Some of the best nightmare movies, Halloween and Friday the 13th movies. I think this is pretty darn close to some of those classics. And one of the reasons is it's got a pretty good pace. The story's interesting. There's a police officer who was, he was pretty heavy-handed. He would be tough on the criminals, and sometimes he would go overboard and also maybe trigger happy, so he had his quirks, he had his rough edges. I think he gets framed, sent to prison, and he's set up and he's murdered in prison. So they think he's dead, but he comes back for vengeance. But in the process, he loses his mind and becomes a maniac, becomes a maniac cop. So he not only kills bad people, but innocent people. Loses his mind. He's becomes the villain. Interesting story though. You kind of feel for him when they do the flashbacks of how he was killed and what you see. Well, not really killed, but certain parts of the movie, there's holes in this movie, but it's a fun horror movie. There's certain parts that make sense. There's certain parts who don't. I can look past that because I grew up with a lot of movies like this, and I've seen a lot of movies over the years, both action and horror movies that have holes, but they're fun. This is a fun movie. I might do a review of Maniac Cop Part 2 with Leo Rossi is in that one. And he was always one of my favorite actors, Leo Rossi. And he's, he's got his personality, which is always entertaining. He's a character, always has been. I always thought he was very entertaining. Leo Rossi, maybe I'll do a review of Maniac Cop Part 2 in the future. We'll see. But tonight it's Maniac Cop Part 1. Tom Atkins is in here, and Bruce Campbell is in here. And it's a pretty complex story. There's twists and turns. There's certain holes in it, but I think it's really, really good. The plot, Bruce Campbell gets mixed up in this and falsely accused for this. A lot of people haven't seen it. I won't say everything that happens, which maybe it's a little too late, but I won't give away everything. It's a good movie. I think it's a hidden gem for people who like horror, people who like suspense and a little action too. I think this will be right up your alley if you don't mind some of the, there's certain parts of the movie that don't make sense, but then again, in the horror genre, there's plentiful movies. There's plenty of movies that don't. I mean, if you want to look for holes, the action or the horror genre and the action genre, they're plentiful of holes. They got plenty of holes. And this movie has holes in it, but it's a fun movie, interesting movie. There's some action movies that are dumb and just the plots don't make sense, but the action is so good, and there's some comedy in there, whether it's accidental or on purpose, that can make the movie, and you don't care if there are holes in it. Well, this one too. But I don't want to criticize it on that angle too much, because certain parts of the story do make sense, and it's not really, it doesn't have huge story problems. There's a few that stand out, and there's a couple things that aren't realistic, just like with other horror movies. But I think if you like horror movies, you're going to like this one. Check it out. To me, I got nostalgia for it. I saw it when I was pretty young. Came out in the 80s, and it's one of my favorite movies still. And this has been the Late Night Review. Please like and subscribe and share this video. And until next time, on another cold night, we'll see you then. Take care, everybody.